welcome to another episode of The Watchdog, here with Low Key for Mimpress, going against the grain, investigating the powerful. Please do support us on Patreon or any other way that you can. In order for us to do this journalism, we are reliant on the support of our readers and viewers. Now, this week, I am joined by one of my favorite guests, the intrepid investigative reporter, Matt Kennard of Declassified UK, who, as always, has some interesting scoops and stories which unfortunately are just completely ignored and not covered by the mainstream media. I believe that without Matt's research into Britain's role in Israel's genocide on Gaza, we would be certainly considerably intellectually poorer for it. We would be more blind than we are today. Matt has revealed some really, really important aspects of the military to military relationship between Britain and Israel during this time. And now we see the escalation in Lebanon, the repeatedly failing attempt by Israel to launch an invasion into southern Lebanon, the assassination of the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. We've seen many different ways that Israel is expanding its war, and I would say behaving as an imperial power. It's an interesting assertion there that we could get into later on in the show. But to start with, Matt, how are you?
I'm all right. It's hard to be all right in these times, isn't it, man? But we've talked over the past year at various points, and I guess doing the work gives you some purpose amongst it all. Because as you say, I think the stories we've done at Declassified, and it's not just me actually. I've got Phil Miller and John McAvoy and Mark Curtis have done a lot of important work on this as well. I think it's had an impact. It's definitely had an impact in Cyprus, the stories, and it's had an impact in the region. It has had barely any impact in the mainstream media. But I think, that's kind of how I've dealt with watching the horror that we've seen unfold, which has affected everyone very deeply, I guess.
Absolutely. One cannot get lost in the paralysis of analysis with these issues. You have to be an actor in these events. And one of the ways in which you have been able to do that has been really revealing some of the activity at Akrotiri base in Cyprus that you alluded to. Could you tell us a little bit about what you have uncovered there, and also what you think could be the role of this key British base regarding the war on Lebanon?
Well, I think it's best to start with a bit of background on what Akrotiri is, because not a lot of people know about it. In fact, no one had basically heard about it before Gaza and before our work on it in this country. This is a colony that Britain retained after awarding independence to Cyprus in 1960, but it wasn't really independent because it gave 3% of its landmass to the British, on which they built a massive airbase on Akrotiri, which is in the west of the island, and a massive intelligence base, which is in the east of the island, called Dhekelia. And ever since, they've just grown and grown. And now it's being used to facilitate the genocide in Gaza through arms, through personnel, through intelligence, through spies, through US Special Forces. That was one story we did. And they're completely secretive as well. So it's impossible to get information through normal transparency channels about what's happening there. It's the governance system is unlike every other overseas territory. It's run as a military dictatorship. All power resides in what's called the administrator. It's quite an Orwellian term, who is appointed by the Ministry of Defence in London. It has no parliament or anything. And it's important to say that has implications because it's not just a military base. As I say, it's 3% of the landmass. And there's military bases on them, but that's huge swathes of land where people live. Cypriots live. And there's no governance system that is democratic at all. So that's the background. And it's less than 400 kilometers from Gaza. And and ever since the genocide started, it has been utilized as the international hub for international forces, mainly European and Americans, to get their people and their weapons to Israel. In fact, Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, even in October,
called it the heartbeat or something.
What's that?
Oh no, there was a reference where I think possibly an Israeli politician referred to it as the heartbeat of
right.
the
Yeah, and
war.
yes, and Haaretz said it was the international hub for these operations. Never picked up in British media. So
Britain's role is massive,
huge.
Logistically speaking.
Exactly. Well, this is an important distinction to make, because the mainstream media does focus on one element of British support to Israel, but it's the one that doesn't really matter, and that's arms. When I say it doesn't really matter, it matters, but it's small compared to the Americans and the Germans. I think over 90
components. Really.
Yes. So I think the Americans give 70% of weapons to Israel. Germany's like 30%, and then the rest is just the tiny amounts from different countries. Yeah. The one part that is important that we provide is to the F-35 jet, which is being used to pummel 15%, maybe more actually, 15%, and that's BAE Systems, and they're using the F-35 to pummel Gaza and Lebanon now and Yemen, and we provide 50% of that. And it wasn't included in the recent suspension of some arms exports by the Labour government, which shows that it was just window dressing. There was 8% of the export licenses were suspended, and not the important one, which would have had an impact on their ability to carry on the genocide. In fact, another interesting facet of it is a anonymous British official told the Daily Express in the summer that Britain had rescinded its access to Israeli F-35s to land at Akrotiri. The imputation being that they'd previously had access.
Yeah.
So we don't know. They won't reveal that information officially. But it's highly likely that F-35s were actually landing at Akrotiri for aftercare and maintenance and other stuff which is involved in that. The F-35 program, which Britain produces, gives 15% or more of. So it's a huge tapestry of support. And actually, I think in finality, what I've come to the conclusion of is we need to stop talking about complicity. We need to talk about participation. Yes. They're participants in a genocide. Through many, through Akrotiri, through intelligence, through logistics. They are involved. And another important element of it, which has never been covered again in the mainstream media, is in the summer, the New York Times got a leak from an Israeli official who revealed that a British spy squad had been deployed to Israel at the beginning of the genocide. Yeah. And he said it gives us, quote, added value, and Britain can collect intelligence that we can't collect on our own. Right. So this was a secret unit that we assume is still there. And they'll say, well, it's all to do with hostage rescue, but they always say that. Do you know how many hostages Britain had in Gaza in January? David Cameron said we had 2. One of them was then likely killed by the Israeli occupation forces. Yeah. So now we have 1, and you're talking. It doesn't make any sense that we have this huge effort to support Israel just for these few hostages, and now only 1. What my hunch is that they're deeply involved in operational activities. And I'll just finish with this. It's also a semantic play, because officially the whole operation in Gaza is about getting the hostages back. Yeah. So effectively you can include anything you want in that. And if the British government ever had to defend it at the ICJ or the ICC, they could say, well, when we said hostage rescue, we were talking about the whole operation.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got the R1 Shadow plane there for hostage rescue. You've got this, don't believe anything until it's officially denied. The SAS, the D-notice that was issued basically is an acknowledgement that the SAS are involved in there. You've obviously got the spy squad, but then you've also got this F-35. They've stopped supposedly giving them access to Akrotiri for the F-35. So the F-35... but what you've also got is you've got the training of Israeli soldiers in this country too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, that's been happening. My colleague Mark Curtis did a story on that earlier this year, and he's been trying to get more information about it. 6 Israeli soldiers it was disclosed were in UK for training. Yeah, and there was an attempt to get more information about where they were, what the training courses were, all this kind of stuff that it should be basic in any kind of democracy.
Yeah.
But he's found it impossible to get information about that. And we're training a military that is being investigated for a plausible genocide at the World Court, the world's highest court.
Yeah.
And the defense minister who's in control of those soldiers is wanted by the ICC's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, for war crimes. This is hugely important stuff. Mark has said that not one British newspaper has ever reported that we're training Israeli military soldiers in the middle of a genocide, which is outrageous, but totally standard. That's the irony of it.
Something fascinating that came out yesterday is that Boris Johnson is now claiming that as foreign minister, when he had a meeting with Netanyahu asked to use the toilet. Following Netanyahu's period of time in the toilet, Johnson had his people go in there and sweep it for bugs. He alleges that they found a listening device in the toilet. And so that then implies that while Johnson was foreign minister, while the Israel lobby was smashing down Alan Duncan, or no, that was maybe later on once Johnson was prime minister, Israel was attempting to spy on him. Later, when Boris Johnson was prime minister, of course, there was NSO Pegasus spyware found in the phone of an employee of Boris Johnson's while he was prime minister. That's what we know, at least. It's quite incredible, isn't it? Because you also have to remember that later on, frankly speaking, and I know there's unfortunately still those in a sense really in denial about what happened. There was an Israeli, British, US operation to stop Jeremy Corbyn becoming prime minister with an outsized role for the Israelis. The Israelis were possibly more aggressive than the British establishment in stopping Corbyn. There was unprecedented level of coordination that certainly happened between the Israelis and the British. It was a daily thing of stopping him. It was on every talk show. It was in every newspaper. It was, I tell you, that was the hegemony in the society really showing itself. And so you take all these things into account. One of the other things that Boris Johnson did, which is really significant, is he gave all of the data to one of Netanyahu's closest friends, Larry Ellison. Ministry of Defense data, Home Office data, NHS data, where else? Foreign Office data, to Oracle, which had offered Netanyahu the directorship. So you have an amazing picture here of state capture and state infiltration. I mean, what did you make of that news that Netanyahu seems to have placed a bug in Johnson's bathroom?
Obviously, it's interesting in itself. It's also interesting that he revealed it because he obviously hasn't revealed it until now. One wonders why he's done that. Because he's very, very pro-Israel. And has been for a long time. But actually,
one of the only things that he emerged from the shadows to get publicly politically involved in was after October 7th, the mobilization by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism against people protesting in the streets. Boris Johnson was involved.
I mean, we know that the Israelis don't see the Americans or the Brits as allies in the sense of like they will cross red lines, which they're crossing all over the Middle East, but they'll cross red lines in terms of diplomatic relationships as well. And I think it must happen a lot that we don't hear about. And even within you mentioned Alan Duncan, like I've done a lot of work about his diaries, and he was a junior minister under Boris Johnson. So when they came for Alan Duncan, his boss was Boris Johnson. And in his diaries, Alan Duncan says when the Conservative Friends of Israel, which is a front for the Israeli embassy, overruled Theresa May's decision to make him Middle East minister, he was having a meeting with Boris Johnson. And he quotes Boris Johnson as saying, I can't believe the Israelis, they always do this.
Wow.
Yes. And this is like the foreign minister. And Alan Duncan's like, I know. And then they're talking about how they how they can get around the Israel lobby. They're like, maybe I'll take the Middle East brief without including Palestine. Eventually, though, Boris Johnson does exactly what he's told by the Israelis, by Conservative Friends of Israel. And that's how, so it's a real window into the fact that, as you say, state capture. Are our politicians working for the interests of Britain, or are they working for the interests of a foreign power, which is tiny? Yeah. And Alan Duncan even has a line in those diaries where he says to the permanent undersecretary, Simon MacDonald, at one point, the Israelis think they control the Foreign Office, full stop, and they do, exclamation mark. So this is the foreign minister basically saying our foreign ministry is being run by Israel. Again, never reported in the mainstream media. But people like Boris Johnson, they don't have politics. They get blown around by different forces. And obviously the Israel lobby and the Israeli state is hugely powerful within the corridors of power. Yeah. So they just will straight away. Back in the day, I don't think that would have happened so easily. Like even people we really dislike politically, like Margaret Thatcher. She had some sense of like, she had some politics, although I hate them.
She expelled the Mossad base.
Exactly. And in 1982, when Lebanon invaded, when Israel invaded Lebanon, she did a full arms embargo to Israel. There was no arms going.
It was standard.
It was standard. It's unheard of. So you do see the level of control over our political system has increased massively, and is much worse in many ways on what's the so-called progressive end of the spectrum. And again, to go back to what you're saying about the bugs, how are they doing that? Many different mechanisms. One is lobbying. One is probably finding information and maybe blackmailing politicians. We don't know. But I imagine that, as I said, it's interesting that he's revealed it. I imagine this is happening to a lot more people, and they just don't reveal it because it's not in their interests. Like they don't want to be made to look like they're stooges for Israel.
I mean, and potentially Boris Johnson's estimation is that now he doesn't really have anything to lose politically. He doesn't have political office to lose, because the probably correct action that should have been taken at the time was there should have there and then been an investigation, and there should have been consequences, diplomatically speaking, for Israel. But instead he kept stum, and now he's gone on record and said it.
You know what? Knowing him, I think it might even be more that he just wants to sell books. Because it's like it's a story that's got into all the media, and it's that kind of spycraft story that people and Israel, and it will probably help him sell books. And this guy is we know he's got no principles at all. So it might be not more complicated than that. But it is interesting, and I think that it does go to the fact that there's a lot more of a general conversation about Israeli control in our society, about the role of the lobby, than there was before the genocide. We can talk about things that were previous. People believe you, and people can see it. You know,
because the damage of the Corbyn years was that as soon as you say certain things, but unfortunately, there's still sort of residue of that idea more among the left. When I started talking about Tommy Robinson, his trajectory, who's funded him, what's happened, I got insane pushback from sections of they call themselves the left.
I know it's ridiculous, because it's like every country has a lobby here, and they're of differing powers. It's not mystical in any way. It's like that, and part of the reason that the Israel lobby's got away with its such outsized influence is because people are scared to talk about it, because they think it feeds into anti-Semitic tropes, blah blah blah. So, but I think that there's no time for that anymore. Like there was never the stakes are too high. There was never time for it. But if you're looking now, and you're making a clinical analysis of where power lies in our society, but you're not speaking out because you don't want to be attacked for or smeared in certain ways, then I don't know. You're never going to speak out because look at the state of what we're seeing, and the fact that the reason that we give such undying support to Israel is the role of this lobby. I believe. I don't think it is because it provides some imperial function for us. Like maybe that was the case once, but all the work I've done at Declassified, and there was obviously a debate. I actually get attacked from parts of the left, the genuine parts of the left, who say, well, you put too much onus on the lobby. It's much more about it being a little imperial outpost. But I just based my analysis on what I've done at Declassified,
on the research,
and all the stories we show that they like the Duncan Diaries.
Yeah.
It's not them talking about like we need Israel because they're doing X, Y, Z for us. They're saying we can't do this because the Israelis are telling us we can't. So the Israel lobby is the one that has the cards and is calling the shots.
Absolutely.
And it's also the Americans as well. Yeah. I mean, in the Foreign Office. Basically, they just copy the Americans. So a lot of the support for Israel comes from the fact that we take our cues from Washington. If you watch actually before Labour were elected, and probably later, I haven't followed it as closely, but basically the Labour Party in opposition, its position on Gaza, literally changed the day after Biden made a statement. You can see, So, so it's two parties. Although the Israelis seem to have much more sort of granular control, like they don't. There's more propensity to just have them dictate what's going on, and we can't have that. We're a sovereign country. We should be. We're not a sovereign country. We should be. You can't have a democracy if our elected leaders are getting overruled by a foreign power. So we need to speak boldly about the Israel lobby. And I also feel like we need to speak boldly about Zionism. I think these are the two elements that people were too scared to talk about before for various reasons. And as I say, the situation is too critical. The stakes are too high now. We need both of these things. There's nothing anti-Semitic about it. Both of these things are political phenomena that we need to analyze and understand. And I think that with what we're seeing in Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iran, with the Israelis, is a logical conclusion of Zionism as a ideology. Yeah, this is an ideology which is supremacist, based on the expulsion of an indigenous population, and has never really had this kind of renaissance that some liberal Zionists like to think that they like to put Netanyahu up as the bogeyman that made it all go wrong. But no, it's not been like that ever since 1948 and before. There has been a campaign to expel the indigenous population, to make them permanently subjugated. There's never been a belief really that there can be a Palestinian state on even on the 67 borders. No one's believed in that in the political class.
So there was in the early stages of the Zionist movement, the early 1900s, after the death of Theodore Herzl, there was an individual by the name of Martin Buber who advocated for a spiritual Zionism, which was peaceful immigration and not violent colonialism. But he never had over 100 followers. This was somebody who was extremely fringe and viewed as a crazy person. You know, you had this grouping called the Five Guys, who were big business figures, capitalists. They viewed a sort of binationalism as a possibility at one point.
Chomsky was subscribed to that.
But ultimately, the dominant trend in Zionism, so the figure that has more schools, cafes, roads, cinemas, hospitals named after them than any other figure in the history of Zionism, is Vladimir Jabotinsky, who was a direct fascist who admired Mussolini, was greatly encouraged by him, who had dealings with hardcore anti-Semites in Ukraine, and was somebody who his entire conception of the way you deal with the Palestinians was also, it was very brutal, but it was also quite honest. And he said, the reason why we have to construct the iron wall to keep out the Palestinians is because any indigenous population will resist alien invaders. These were the exact terminology he used. Now, who was Jabotinsky's right-hand man? The father of Benjamin Netanyahu. And so there's really a direct line from Jabotinsky to Netanyahu, actually. But also the other side of the Zionist movement, Ben Gurion, who is sometimes held up as as a better way it could have been. You know, this was an ethnic cleanser. This was also somebody that in 1915, when he was writing in the New York Library, he said the Palestinians are the indigenous people of the land. We are foreign. The difference between them, that while both Ben Gurion and Jabotinsky were both trained in the Jewish Legion of the British military in World War One, alongside the son of Herbert Samuel, who would become the High Commissioner in Palestine, the British High Commissioner in Palestine, charged with implementing the Balfour Declaration. Jabotinsky was later imprisoned by the British and sentenced to something like 15 years, but ended up serving 9 months. But Ben Gurion was a reliable ally of the British and an implementer of British policy at different points, even when it went as far as trying to limit temporarily Zionist immigration into Palestine. Whereas Jabotinsky was a militant opponent of the British.
And founded a terrorist group, the Irgun, as well.
Yeah. And you have these amazing aspects of the story where, a letter written from the Stern Gang to the Nazi government in Germany. You've got the mainstream of the Zionist movement negotiating the Havara Agreement with the Nazi government in 1933. The guy that negotiated it coming back to Palestine and getting assassinated by the Jabotinsky side, regularly calling each other Nazis and brown shirts.
Well, also they,
and one thing that I tell you is a great crime of what we lived through. Ken Livingstone is a legend of the left. Ken Livingstone did incredible things as mayor of London, as a political figure. For Ken Livingstone to be thrown on the trash heap the way he was is really one of the crimes of our period. And there's no justification. And there's no contrition for it either. And ultimately, if that could be done to someone of the stature of Ken Livingstone, for merely pointing out what we've just discussed as historical facts that are openly spoken about. There's the amazing book Perfidy, written by Ben Hecht, which goes into the case of Israel Katzner. Israel Katzner was a key figure in Ben Gurion's group, who was sent as a Zionist emissary to Hungary, and directly negotiated with Eichmann for the facilitation of the Zionist elite within Hungary to go to Palestine, and bargained with Jewish people being sent to Auschwitz, and knew they were being sent to Auschwitz, and they didn't know they were being sent to Auschwitz. Now, you got to understand, the book Perfidy was written by Ben Hecht, who was a Hollywood producer, but was a supporter of Jabotinsky. Now, the perception among supporters of Jabotinsky was that Ben Gurion sold out to both the British and the Nazis because they had allowed things to happen and cooperated with them in different ways. And one of them was this figure, Israel Katzner. And so then there was a case in the 50s where Katzner was accused with a leaflet published that he was a collaborator with the Nazis. Now, he made a wrong decision because he tried to sue the individual that passed this leaflet around. What happened in the court is it all got revealed that Katzner was in fact collaborating with him. There was warm letters between him and Eichmann. There was even a way in which he interceded on Eichmann's court case, put in a good word for him. What happened to Katzner? Katzner was assassinated. He was assassinated. He was killed. The fear was that Katzner could have revealed far higher up the chain, i.e. Ben Gurion, this level of cooperation. Now, these documents pertaining to his assassination have been sealed repeatedly for decades. So then one has to wonder, are we saying that the nascent Israeli internal intelligence agency killed Israel Katzner in order to cover up this aspect of history? So then what is the extension of that? It lurches into British politics And frankly, a legend of the left was sacrificed. And he was the first shot. Livingston was the first shot. Those of us like myself, we did not realize what this meant at the time. But what this actually meant was that deference to the Israel lobby on membership of the Labour Party was an inevitability. And that's how it played out.
And they carried on.
And they carried on and they kept going, you know, and like Winston Churchill said, he said, an appeaser is the person that feeds the crocodile, only to be eaten last by the crocodile. That's appeasement. And that's what happened.
Yeah, it is.
The genocidal Zionist lobby was appeased in this country. How far will it go, Matt? We have 16 political prisoners in this country linked to Palestine Action cases. Is the Zionist lobby role in this country going to go as far as assassinations? Is it going to go as far as more imprisonment? This cowardice, which actually became common sense across this period, is truly a mark of shame on all of us, and actually took us back years. Because what's been proven again and again is if you fight, you won't always win. But if you don't fight, you won't win. And if you do fight, you might win.
Yeah. It's important to talk about this because one of the things I've noticed since the end of the Corbyn era is all this is brushed under the carpet.
Yeah.
And that's seen as fine. In fact, it's seen as uncouth to even talk about the individuals that played a part in that, in the political assassinations of all these various people.
And some of them, frankly speaking, have been the beneficiaries, algorithmically, YouTube-wise, on what's happened in Gaza.
Exactly. And we can't move forward if we don't have a reckoning of what happened, because it was, as you say, they deconstructed the movement bit by bit, and I actually think parts of the Corbyn team core were involved as well, but they had less space to move. The people who had space to move were the people in the media that could actually say stuff. I'm not defending them joining in, but anyway, something huge happened. Well, they made us pick off our allies. Yeah, not all of us, but the people who and we need to talk about it because it's gonna happen again. It might be a different issue. Yeah. But the fact is, there was a very, very low understanding, firstly of the power of the Israel lobby, of their tactics, but also of how to fight a political war. Yeah. These people were within the political system, but also in the media, were naive. Yeah. And at best and immature in their analysis, and also, yes, I mean that's a nice way of putting it. Some would say cowards, and maybe even careerists that wanted to protect themselves.
Opportunists, careerists.
Because the other thing was, we people who were actually speaking out on this stuff during the time, we were traduced massively, smeared in all sorts of ways. Still will be. Although there is an opening now. Like I don't get attacked as much by the people that used to attack me speaking about this stuff now, because I think there is people know it's over, and there's not the pressure from the Israel lobby now because they don't care now. They've done their job.
Well, I mean, we don't know the price. We haven't paid the price yet.
Well, we paid the price because we lost the one chance for transformative change in this country.
You and me personally.
Yeah. Well, we know we're never going to work in the mainstream media. Like,
is that the extent of the price?
Well, we don't know. Yeah, it's true. I mean, my sense is that things will ramp up. And to go to your question about current repression in this country, they're basically trying to deal with a massive contradiction, which is that they've lost control of the narrative in this country. They've lost, like, if you look at the polls now, there's a
7 out of 10.
Yeah, the lowest favorability ratings for Israel ever. Yeah. Everyone is disgusted with what they've seen in Gaza. Yeah. Yet we have a government which is supporting it to the hilt verbally in terms of military intelligence, whatever. Yeah. So that contradiction is not sustainable. And they can't get back the narrative because even though the media's on their side, that people have social media and they're getting alternative points of view and they're getting evidence that is just unarguable on their phones. So how do you then deal with a population which is out of control and not speaking to your tune? The only tool you have left is the law. And that is what they're turning to. I mean, to go to your question about more serious aspects, I think if that fails, then they'll go to there'll be different tactics. But in terms of what we're saying now, it's the law. And one interesting example of that is the proscription of Hezbollah in 2019, which was very, very controversial, even within
the political and the military wing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So in the 2000s, the military wing was prescribed. But in 2019, the organization as a whole was prescribed.
Which has 15 members of parliament in Lebanon.
And also, Theresa May had said the year before that they wouldn't do it because it wasn't in Britain's interest, because they wanted to have... Well, Lebanon's an ally. You can't prescribe something. They have 2 cabinet members who control the Ministry of Labour and the Ministry of Public Works. And they never prescribed Sinn Féin, even during the Troubles, the political wing of the IRA. Although they say they're not. But anyway, but again, British policy was moved by the Israel lobby against British interests.
So tell me about that. What do we know?
Well, we know that... Stuart Pollack gave an interview.
Stuart Pollack was head of...
Stuart Pollack is kind of like the most hyperactive, I should say, Israel lobbyist. He's a senior figure in CFI, the honorary president, I think now. But he's basically just been lobbying on behalf of Israel for a long, long time within the corridors of power. He gave an interview last year to some forum where they were talking about efforts to get the UK government to prescribe the IRGC, Iranian IRGC, which is a current Israel lobby aim and endeavor.
But they're actually at odds with the Americans on that.
Exactly.
The Americans are telling the British, don't do it because we need you as a back channel.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't make any sense. But so he was talking about that, again, which would go against British interests. But he was interviewed. He said, well, what we need to do on the IRGC is just pure lobbying action. That's the quote. And then he says, with Hezbollah, it took us ages.
Yeah.
But I think it will happen eventually at IRGC. Yeah. So he says, with Hezbollah, it took us ages. Who's us? CFI.
Yeah.
Israel lobby, Israel embassy.
Yeah.
So, and then another revealing insight into it comes from the Alan Duncan diaries, where he's talking about the prescription of Hezbollah, which he opposed, the whole of it. And he says that he went into the Commons and saw Eric Pickles and Stuart Pollack, who had, quote, mobilized their Commons troops in the cause of Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, it's explicit.
Yeah.
But again, never been reported. So, but the prescription of Hezbollah is about clamping down on free speech, clamping down on our freedoms.
Yeah.
Because whatever you think of Hezbollah, a tenet of a free society is you can talk openly about different groups that might be against your state's interests. We don't live in a fascist state where you have to take the state line on everything, but we don't have that ability now with Hezbollah. Hezbollah now are repelling a genocidal army that is invading and has murdered 2,000 people in a week.
And practicing their right under UN Resolution 3246.
Exactly, but you can't verbally support that. You can't verbally support that resistance, which is a massive... wherever you stand on the issues, that's a massive dent in our free speech. And the same goes for Hamas, and the same will go for the IRGC if they eventually do it. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to use the law to discipline the population, which has got out of control. And that also goes for Palestine Action. If you look at and journalists, like if you look at what happened to Richard Medhurst and Sarah Wilkinson, just background on that. About a month ago, Sarah Wilkinson, who's an independent journalist who updates on social media about Gaza, Lebanon, her government's complicity in it, her house was raided by 13 police, some in balaclavas. She was bundled into a police van They tipped over the urn with her mum's ashes in that she had to then clean off the wall. Horrific stuff. Richard Medhurst, another independent journalist, the week before was detained at Heathrow Airport for 23 hours, given a 1-hour interview. Yeah. So they were set, and that was both under the Terrorism Act, Section 12, which is the prescription. Apparently, they'd given support to prescribed groups. So you're seeing the strong arm of the law clamping down on anyone speaking out about Gaza. And that is because they've lost control of the narrative. But I don't think it will work, because they're going to have to put thousands of people in prison eventually if they keep clamping down the spaces where you can speak openly about Palestine. And that's when I think that, yes, we'll probably see other tactics that might be more serious, might be worrying, but we don't know. But we're now seeing, and this is not just here, we're seeing it in the United States with the student encampments, the brutality that was rained down on. We're seeing the erosion of our freedoms on behalf of Israel, which is outrageous. We're talking about a tiny little country, apartheid settler colony, which is committing genocide and terrorism across the region. We need to cut all ties with this government, sanction it, but we're doing the opposite. And I mean, in a general sense, I don't think it's going to end well, because, I mean, I don't even think it's going to end well for the imperial powers on their own terms, because they're losing a very important strategic region. Although the Arab despots are basically licking the boot of the Tel Aviv regime and have done.
And funding it. You know, there's Affinity Partners, which was set up by Jared Kushner, as he called it, a corridor for Gulf investment in Israel. You have to remember, Jared Kushner is so close to Benjamin Netanyahu that Netanyahu used to sleep in his room when he visited New York, and Kushner was at college playing basketball. Now, Affinity Partners was started with UAE, Saudi, and Qatari money. 2 billion from the Saudis. Direct 2 billion. What happened to that money? So they now are one of the key shareholders in a company called the Shlomo Group, which is Israel's largest vehicle company, but also builds all of the ships for the Israeli Navy. Now, the Shlomo Group has equipped several key units in the Israeli military since the beginning of the Gaza genocide. In addition to that, Affinity Partners now is one of the top shareholders in one of the owners of Elbit Systems. You know, the company that manages Israel's airspace, Highlander Aviation, an Israeli company, has been directly invested in by the UAE government through an arms company called Edge Group. So it's partly owned. So all of this is actually being funded by Gulf governments. The regional war, which is now more honest than it was during the war on Yemen, because the Israelis had involvement, the British had involvement, the US had involvement, but the Saudis were the instrument, the face of it. Yeah. Now you have the opposite happening. The face of it is Israel and the United States to a lesser degree, but Britain, France, Canada, Germany, and these Gulf states are directly involved in this conspiracy against the independence of the region. This is a part of the decolonial process that is playing out across the region. And, you know, the most articulate, tangible expression of love for other people is resistance. The most generous act someone can carry out is that of sacrificing themselves for the collective freedom. And what I am also sort of disappointed, and also I feel it's pitiful, the lack of intellectual curiosity amongst people who actually think a lot of their own brains. They think a lot of themselves, but they don't have the curiosity to look into what could cause people to, against all odds, against insurmountable challenges, launch themselves into resistance. In our society, our neoliberal society, that's dog eat dog and selfish and self-interest is the rule. They cannot look at this as a phenomenon worth studying. They don't look at Vietnam the way we look at Vietnam. They don't. So it's just fascinating. These people are complete idiots, man. And you listen to the BBC and they're still talking about a two-state solution.
Yeah, I know.
And I think, so what's happening here is you are subjugating your intellectual faculties to a PR lie.
Yeah.
In order, because it's incredible. In the time of genocide, in the time of imperial Israel bombing Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria, you're sitting there talking about, will there be a willing Palestinian counterpart for the two-state solution? This is poison. This is poison to the extent that actually you're evil.
Yeah.
You're just evil. And your greatest victim is not the people that you're talking crap about. It's the people you're talking crap to. Because the people you're talking crap to are sitting there thinking this has anything to do with reality. That's not what's happening here.
I know.
And we from the day we're born in this society are subject to the most vindictive, manipulative, psychological warfare on behalf of the British establishment, the US military regime, and the Israeli military regime. We're raised with it.
You saw the reaction to the Jordanian minister.
Yeah.
Making a comment at I don't know if it was at the UN, it was somewhere.
Yeah, it was at the UN.
And he said what you're saying. It was like, we all agree with a two-state solution. We want to guarantee Israel's security.
It's pathetic.
But people who should know better were promoting that as like, this guy. And then what happened? A couple of days later,
Jordan shooting down.
Exactly. And also the Jordanians, I mean, this is a whole different story, but were the main Arab state that allowed the establishment of Israel in 1948.
King Abdullah. The reason King Abdullah was assassinated, the grandfather of the current Abdullah. Yeah.
So
it's the reason. It's the reason.
Yeah. So there's I think that then I'm quite hopeful in one sense that what we're seeing, as you said, has exposed the lay of the land in the Middle East,
and the society, and our society,
and our society. But particularly about the tyrants that rule in the Gulf that were installed, most of them by the British to keep the oil going. The later ones, anyway. But geopolitical control. When Iran launched their operation recently against Israeli military sites, took out Nevatin. Which was a humanitarian intervention to destroy Zionist terror infrastructure that had been committing genocide in Gaza.
Humanitarian intervention that all who believe in Article 1 of the Genocide Convention would support.
Yeah, of course. But if we did it, but not if... that's the mainstream. It's never going to be presented like that. But then that's exposing these Arab tyrants. Yeah. Well, the Jordanians, as you said, shot down some of them for a start, but the other ones, they're exposed as, and I don't think that's not, again, like I was saying here, the discrepancy between the rulers and the population in terms of their attitudes to this is not sustainable. I don't think it's sustainable between the dictators who rule in the Gulf and their people, because this is the Muslim community, and they're the people on the ground are outraged by what's going on.
I'm not so sure. I think what the Israelis want to do is they want to establish curriculums in Lebanon, in Yemen, particularly. This is what they envision after getting rid of these groups, right? Which they won't be able to do because if you look at the history of it, they killed Abbas Musawi, one of the founding Secretary General of Hezbollah in the early 90s. They killed him with his baby and his wife. What happened after that? Hezbollah grew in strength and went on to defeat Israel twice, 2000 and 2006. And the US military documents around those wars are fascinating, because it says that in 2006, Hezbollah had 9,000 fighters. They only used 3,000 of them to beat Israel. Extraordinary. Now, they're believed to have 100,000 fighters. Now, off the back of the Syria war, you have fighters from Yemen to Iraq to Afghanistan to Syria who have expressed a willingness to go to Lebanon and fight. So Israel can airstrike landlocked Gaza and it can airstrike Lebanon. It can't enter on the ground. And it cannot be stuck in a war of attrition because it will not win. And you will have fighters flocking from everywhere.
Well, the US said that. They early on, there was a briefing where they said, we don't think Israel should invade because you'd get 200,000 mujahideen from around the region coming to fight. But they did invade Lebanon, and they've just got their asses kicked. And now,
daily, literally, yesterday something like 14 soldiers killed. The day before something.
And
like
now, what do the Israelis? The same thing. They bomb civilians. They bombed. Yeah, they did the same thing in Gaza. If you watched when the resistance had a successful operation, the following day they just kill hundreds of people just wantonly. I agree. What I meant more about the Arab tyrants is it's crystallized for everyone where people stand. Everyone's where everyone stands, because who are the we've had nearly a year of genocide now, and who are in the Islamic world, who are the forces that have done anything to stop it? Right, I'm not saying we don't have, regardless of your opinion on these groups. It's outside of Palestine. We know. It's Hezbollah. It's the Houthis, and it's Iran. But people are looking at that and being like, well,
but let me tell you
something.
But let me tell you where Israel's argument is. So Israel's argument, and it's also the Palestinian Authority's argument, is that Gaza is your Iranian model. This is their argument. You have the Iranian model in Gaza. That's how it ends. You have the Saudi, the UAE, the EU, the international consensus model in the West Bank. Less bad, right? You have, of course, the problem is for Zionism is that they're going to do the Nakba in the West Bank too. And that's what the sleeper cells, which are the settlers, are there for, because it will be the settlers that do it. So Israel is able to do arm's length thing. But what they want to apply across the region is the same curriculum-based pressure that they've done in the UAE and Saudi, because they view them as successful models. They view Egypt, Jordan, the UAE and Saudi as success stories on a people level. Because there's been one or two operations carried out by groups, like a particular group that developed in Egypt. But generally speaking, the population is so well disciplined, is more well disciplined than in any previous quote unquote Arab-Israeli war. Whether we're talking 73, we're talking 67, Egypt were a factor in those wars. In this case, you have the neutralization of the largest Arab population or Arabic-speaking population. Neutralized, 100 million people sleeping. In the case of Saudi and UAE, they've been so integrated security-wise. Literally, Celebrite, the same company that hacks phones for the British police here, hacks phones for the Saudi government, hacks phones of Saudi citizens for the Saudis. We know from the Jamal Khashoggi case, they were using NSO, Pegasus, to hack his phone. Same thing in the UAE. So they've rolled out, in the name of religious tolerance, normalization in those societies. So that what they call it tasamuh ad-dini, religious tolerance, then is used as a subterfuge for normalization with the Israelis. So you have emissaries from Israel within the society, you have synagogues set up. And so therefore, despite the fact there's literally no Jewish community in those societies, there just isn't. You've set up synagogues, you've set up places for them to do things. And those people are coming directly from Israel and actually reserves in the Israeli military. So the head of the Jewish community in Saudi Arabia, he's just an Israeli ambassador, and he's in the Israeli military now. Basically, that was his role. But the point is that what Israel is aiming for is the same population change that has taken place, unfortunately, in Saudi, the UAE, and Egypt, to apply it to Yemen, Lebanon. And, they also, they want to decapitate Syria too.
Yeah. Do you think, just a question for you on what you've outlined, do you think that's sustainable though? Has it been a successful operation, or is it vulnerable to I don't know, an uprising or some kind of psychological change?
I don't think we're in any danger of an uprising. From my limited perspective from distance, I don't think we're in any danger of an uprising in the UAE. Saudi possibly more, because
Bahrain there was one, obviously.
Bahrain, Bahrain is different. Bahrain, you have an organization which is part of the Axis of Resistance within Bahrain, which has launched drones at Israel. Once or twice. Nothing too major. Kuwait is, of course, a different issue because Kuwait has a larger Palestinian population, but also the political elite are generally more pro-Palestinian. But the rest of those,
Qatar as well is different complexion.
Well, I'm coming to the view that great support for journalistic endeavor is valuable, but on a political level, they're certainly not trustworthy.
Well,
there's decisions that have been taken that during this war, as you may be about to tell me, there's flights that have gone directly from the US Central Command in Qatar to Israel, transporting weapons throughout this war. And with all due respect to the thousands of brilliant workers that work for Al Jazeera, that is not enough for me to pretend that hasn't happened during this war. And so it's an interesting question of where diplomacy ends and spying begins.
And look, they have a foot in both doors. Like here, they had the only joint squadron that's been created since the Second World War is a Qatari, a UK one, RF Waddington. Like they train together all the time. It's celebrated.
It's a protectorate. It's a protectorate.
Yeah.
It's a protectorate.
I mean, I don't know. I'm more hopeful. I think things can change very quick because you can erect these systems of control, which they have done over decades. But there are ruptures in the fabric of, and I feel like Gaza is a rupture. I don't know because I haven't followed too closely.
It should be on a people to people level because but
the repression there is obviously horrific. Though. Saudi particularly is.
But with the exception of the groups that you've mentioned and the formation that you've mentioned as an axis, the political elites of the world are at ease with the sacrificing of Gaza.
Of course, yeah.
That those 2 million people exist in a twilight zone, an alternative reality, which is constant industrial scale killing.
Yes.
And that's the price of international stability.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think also, there's been what Qatar has constantly done is present to the rest of the world the potential of the United States being an honest, neutral arbiter and broker.
Yeah.
Yes, excellent work. In no way would I downplay the excellent work that's also happened. But you cannot trust the state that hosts the Central Command. And during this, there's been flights that have gone directly from there to Israel to aid. You can't. And
well, look at what happened in Yemen with the war there in 2015, which, as you mentioned, was a British, American, Saudis led UAE ran torture chambers there. But
and
I mean,
Israel
that
too.
was savage.
And Israel too.
And Israel, of course. That was to squeeze the resistance as hard as they could. And they went so hard. Like, people don't understand what happened in Yemen. It was the worst humanitarian crisis in the world.
Absolutely.
2.3 million kids on the verge of starvation. The Saudi air campaign was absolutely brutal. They bombed wedding, hospitals, prisons, everything you can imagine. Absolutely.
The sewage system.
All while Britain had 5 personnel inside their air operations centre. Again, never been mentioned.
BAE Systems.
Well, BAE Systems
had like hundreds, if not thousands, of employees directly involved in the maintenance of the whole.
Well, it all goes
project.
back to the Al Yamamah arms deal in the 80s with the Saudis, which is 40% of our arms go to the Saudis. Basically, the Saudis, our relationship with Saudis is all based on BAE Systems. But they didn't win. No, that's the thing. They didn't win.
They didn't win. And out of that, the phoenix that came out of that is some of the poorest people in the world who are saying, hold on, we've had 10 years of a genocidal war campaign on us.
Yeah.
We're not gonna leave Gaza.
Yeah.
We're not gonna leave Gaza.
Yeah.
And you know, there's inspiration, you know, even on a human basis. It's worthy of study.
It's for sure.
Look at it. Think about the decisions that people are making at this time. Even us here.
Yeah.
Even your work, my work. They're so disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah. This media, you know, they're almost more disgusting than the political elite.
Yeah.
Because with the political elite, there's actual large benefits that they can derive. Obviously, it's smaller than the people they suck up to.
Yeah, I know.
But with the media, it's like you're selling your soul, and you're not even living that much better than other people, man. Within society, so
it's a different.
You're so deferent to power that it's just instinctive robot behavior.
But I think we need to change our conception of the media. It's not. We don't
and
have
this
a media.
War has changed it,
but we don't have a media.
But, you know, this war has changed it too. This
of course.
war has been part of the change.
Yes, and it's happening
because we've battered them.
But we have
battered them,
and they're on the back foot. Yeah. Just last night, the BBC put up a headline that said it named Israel as the airstrike. Right. And it said that the West Bank was occupied. It was kind of like a full house.
Where did that come from?
Yeah,
that came from us trolling them.
So, or some intern late at night who's going to get fired. But we don't have a media. This is what I'm saying to people. Don't talk about a media. We have a propaganda system. When you talk about the political elements, they are the political elements. They are part of the political system. Yeah. They're not a check. Right. Like, the whole conception we have of the media is wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to understand, as you say, it happens from a very young age. Everything we're told about how our society works is basically a lie.
Yeah.
From the fact we live in a democracy, we don't. It's an oligarchy. We've seen that with Corbyn.
Yeah.
We have a media, we don't. We have a propaganda system with propagandists and stenographers. We've seen that with Gaza. Like, all these foundations of our understanding of the society we do are completely false. And it's funny because you kind of assume it's the case. I mean, the work we both do, you see it in a very clear way with Declassified. How when you're doing these stories that are not hard stories, you know, they're using any journalist could do it.
Exactly.
But no journalist does. Why? No one's, as you said, we don't have a dictator that's telling you can't. Yeah. They're just literally, they're drunk on all these ideologies and all these myths that they're fed. And they think that they're doing good journalism. But I wonder what they think when they see that, an article on Declassified has sparked a protest on Akrotiri.
Best to avoid.
Yeah.
They think
why can't I do that? Oh, I'm doing one about Russian interference that I've been told to do by Integrity Initiative. And to go to your point about the resistance and the journalists in Gaza, it has had a deep impact on me, like I'm sure you know, because it equips you with a bravery. Not that we're working in conditions that are anywhere near what they are, but when you see people, when you see the human spirit, what it does under the most extreme pressure it can be put under, and it doesn't go the way of hate. Or turning on themselves, although I'm sure that happens because they've been kept in a killing. In many cases it goes towards love, and as you say, love for other people that you have no connection to apart from the fact they're fellow humans, and the fact you're going to make yourself a target by doing it. The target, the Yemenis who are sending who are launching operations against Israel to stop the genocide, they are making themselves a target, and they've been targeted, bombed by the US, the UK, and Israel.
Yeah.
Horrendous attacks. The journalists in Gaza and the resistance, they're working under conditions. The journalists, particularly, they're working under conditions where they know they're being targeted for their reporting, but they continue. Now, how can we look in the mirror? And not see a monster if we're not doing everything we can with the much bigger freedoms we have here, and we're in the imperial capitals, well, alongside Washington. What we do here has an impact. So, I mean, I definitely feel like it's equipped all of us with bravery. I hope that continues, and I think it will, because I don't think the situation is going to get any better. We are at a full. This is the turning point in world history. We have seen the mask come off the empire. The empire was always bloodthirsty, brutal, savage, didn't give a shit about people in the global south that were in the way of resources or geopolitical control, whatever it was. They never did. But even in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, when they did the secret war, killed hundreds of thousands of people, we weren't seeing it on our screens every day.
Now it's naked.
Now we've seen that Gaza is the butt end of empire. It's where all the concentration of the whole empire is concentrated in Gaza. Ideologically, weapons, everything. And so we're seeing the destruction of Gaza, but we're also seeing the destruction of all the myths that they've erected to try and convince us that we live in a world which is controlled by a benevolent or a benign power in the United States and its allies. We don't. We live in a rampantly imperial, rapacious system that does not care a jot for human life. That's basic. And look, no one can look at what had been happening in Gaza and not want to do everything they can to stop it. You have to be a psychopath. You have to be. You have to be a psychopath or drunk on ideologies like Zionism. But Biden, Blinken, the whole of the Congress, look what happened when Netanyahu went.
Disgusting.
Unbelievable. That will be watched by future generations if there are any. As an example of how a genocidal, depraved political class acts. Because that was, but I think honestly, and I'm not just saying this to hit a note of optimism amongst all the horror. Conversations I have with people who are not political, or at least not plugged in like we are.
They're changing.
They have noticed these contradictions we've been outlining. They have noticed,
and they're horrified.
And also, they don't stop at one thing. You don't look and think, "Well, I've been lied to about Israel," and think, "Okay, well, then I'm going to go back to
everything else."
But they move on to the next one. Then they say, "If the BBC's lying to me, maybe the Guardian's lying to me," and you're like, well, they are too. So I really think that we need to crystallize and work out a way of maintaining the momentum that is the realizations, because there is a big awakening. Unfortunately, the cost is way too high. Like if you look at what's happening in Gaza and now Lebanon, I mean, degrees of savagery that I haven't seen. I haven't seen before.
Absolutely.
And
these are the front lines of civilization.
Exactly. They are.
You know, they talked about the clash of civilization.
Exactly.
To justify the war on terror. This is a clash of civilization.
Exactly. Well, if Israel wins, barbarism reigns.
That's right.
That it's as simple as that. There is no way back. In many ways, there's no way back from what's happened in Gaza anyway. I don't think that anyone can go, or the system can go back to how it is. Because I'll just finish with this. The other thing is the systems had to smash itself up. The whole international order was designed by the United States and its allies to basically project power, right? So including bodies like the ICC.
And now those are completely...
Well, they've had to... there was something in Congress where they passed a resolution they would arrest the ICC Karim Khan if he goes to the United States and his son or something.
And sanction them.
Sanction them, but they can't, and now they've just banned, Israel's just banned the UN Secretary General. UN again is another part of the imperial tapestry. So they're smashing the system to pieces to get this genocide done and to protect this little settler colony. That's going to have big impacts. Like we lived in the law of the jungle, but there was at least some pretense that we didn't. Now that pretense is out the window.
Absolutely. People's
eyes are open. The world, how the world really works is obvious to anyone who's looking just your average Joe's looking at their phones. So I think there's some hope from that, but it just depends how many people have to die before there's a societal change, and it might be that we all have to die before that happens. I don't know.
Well, Matt, that was an amazing conversation. I hope we can do it again. Please support Declassified UK. Check out Matt's work, and support us also here at Mint Press. But most importantly, support Gaza, support Palestine, support Yemen, support Iraq, support the forces in the region who are protecting life. Thank you.